Hey folks, welcome to the channel. So as a heads up, this video is going to spoil pretty much all the Kingdom Hearts games. So at this point, the internet has figured out that Kingdom Hearts is wild. What was originally billed as a cute, lighthearted crossover of Disney and Final Fantasy has turned into a 4D murder board of cloning, time travel, and like 3 distinct types of parallel universes. It's a weird mix of saccharine and incomprehensible, like Evangelion by way of Caillou. To play or even watch these games is mortifying, either from the silliness,
Swing this way, we'll dance and we'll play. It's very easy, come on and just take a touch and shake a bit.
or the abject seriousness.
So we made a copy of the world, and then pulled those hearts apart.
This is a story where Mickey Mouse creates a sentient digital copy of the protagonist without the protagonist's consent or knowledge, and that's not even the wackiest thing Mickey does in this universe.
Goofy?
This is not happening.
They'll pay for this.
It is an absolute mess. And yet, this is a game series that means a shocking amount to a shocking amount of people. Yes, it was a commercial hit, but more than that, you hear stories of Kingdom Hearts tattoos, or Kingdom Hearts weddings, or thriving communities trying to make sense of the game's unknowable lore. You have childhood me, hopped up on Surge in the secret ending video, netscaping my way to the nearest Kingdom Hearts message board because I was so excited to talk about the theories. And you have adult me, getting my first adult job, and deciding to watch Let's Plays of all the Kingdom Hearts games in what psychologists would readily classify as regression. I know the series is, at best, a fascinating train wreck, but I can't help but think of it fondly. Why is that? Basically, it's because Kingdom Hearts is nostalgia. It's not just that I'm nostalgic because I played it as a kid, though. Kingdom Hearts feels like nostalgia. Its music sounds like nostalgia. Its story distorts and softens and rewrites like nostalgia. And it aches like nostalgia. Because Kingdom Hearts, for all its convolutions, for all its slapdash cosmology and dreams within dreams and time travel into computer simulations, it always follows the same pattern. It tries to go back, even when it can't. Title card. First, I want to address the surface level nostalgia of these games because that's the most obvious one. There's a clear external nostalgia that a lot of players bring to it because we played it as kids. I played Kingdom Hearts when I was young, and so I think of it fondly. I have the same reaction to, like, my childhood optometrist's waiting room. It doesn't mean there's anything inherently nostalgic there, though. But there's an equally clear internal nostalgia through the use of Disney and Final Fantasy characters. For those who have never played the games, most of the levels in Kingdom Hearts are based on a distinct Disney movie. One will be set in Aladdin, another in Peter Pan, one hilariously in Pirates of the Caribbean,
Aztec treasury.
and so on. These levels rely on the thrill of recognition and, honestly, not much else. Sure, there are a few Disney worlds that contribute to the overarching narrative. Monstro's belly turns Pinocchio into a conduit for Sora and Riku's boy angst. Others lean into the fun of 2 very different versions of cartoonishness colliding, like watching this serious anime villain get yeeted by Sully from Monsters, Inc. For the most part, though, the Disney worlds follow the same pattern, retelling the corresponding movie's plot beat by beat, just faster, worse, and with Sora, Donald, and Goofy staring placidly in the background. These levels functionally ask the player, hey, remember when Jafar turned himself into a genie? That was cool. It assumes you're familiar with the Disney movies, and that they mean something to you already, and that you'll be excited to see them again. It's the clearest, most obvious, most Ready Player One type of nostalgia. Recognition. But nostalgia is more than just recognition. It's the process of infusing memories with emotion, making them tender or poignant or pure, adding meaning to moments after the fact, and in doing so, distorting them. Nostalgia heightens the good while cutting out the painful or boring, leaving you with a memory you don't just recall but feel. And in Kingdom Hearts, the game's exaggeratedly, impossibly idyllic depictions of childhood do just that. Title card. The first game opens in Destiny Islands, a lush, secluded tropical paradise whose inhabitants are all children living out an endless summer vacation. There's all the fun parts of childhood here, the leisure parts. nascent crushes, friendly rivalries, low-stakes adventures that feel all-encompassing, and a naive, romantic desire to leave, unaware of all the beauty around you. This is a place entirely free from adult influence. There's no school here, no jobs, no town, and no parents. And unlike a lot of Disney movies where parents get murked early on and that's a driving motivation for the characters, there's no indication that these kids ever had parents. They're neither shown nor referenced. And all the less exciting parts of childhood that would come along with them, like the responsibilities, or the relative powerlessness, or the boredom and the frustration, those are absent with them. To be clear, I'm not trying to give the game flack for its lack of realism. It's not, repeated truancy is a misdemeanor, and these school-aged children are never in class, ding. The Destiny Islands aren't supposed to be realistic. They're supposed to feel like a memory, slightly blurred and prettier than reality. Because, after all, even our memories aren't realistic. As I understand the science, which is to say, not much, people's memories aren't records of what happened so much as recreations. They're your brain creating a sophisticated, multi-sensory mental image that is still just a close approximation of what happened. This will necessarily distort it. There's even some research suggesting that each subsequent recall of that memory is another recreation, leading to even further distortion. Altogether, this means we don't remember what happened, not exactly. We twist it without meaning to, adding emotion and meaning and narrative where maybe none was to begin with. Our memories are mutable, and nostalgia only happens after the fact. In storytelling terms, it's a retcon. And oh my god, does Kingdom Hearts love retcons. Title card. For those unfamiliar, retcon is short for retroactive continuity, and it's when a story changes its past events to fit its current needs. Distinct from a plot twist, a retcon deliberately undoes something that was deliberately done, like bringing a character back to life or changing their motivations to make them more or less sympathetic. It's common in long-running TV shows and comic books, where multiple creators are trying to tell their own stories within the same continuity. Kingdom Hearts, though, is at a pretty stable creative direction from Tetsuya Nomura, but it still retcons constantly. Let's take a look at the first game's antagonist, a guy named Ansem, or Billy Zane having an absolutely incredible time.
Darkness is the heart's true essence.
Ansem, according to Kingdom Hearts 1, is the deposed king of a world that fell into ruin after his experiments into the human heart turned increasingly macabre. Pretty standard stuff as far as villains go, and there's nothing to suggest that Ansem is anything but the big bad, and certainly nothing to suggest he's anything but what we've been told. But in Kingdom Hearts 2, it reveals that Ansem isn't really Ansem, but instead a guy named Xehanort, or more accurately, Xehanort's corrupted and disembodied heart. And the real big bad is Xemnas, Xehanort's heartless but still self-aware body, and also an early adopter of H&M.
Eternal.
And then Birth by Sleep shows us that the Xehanort we saw before isn't Xehanort either, but Xehanort after he's possessed a separate character named Terra. And the real, final, true Xehanort is this guy. This guy, a 65-year-old man who attended a midnight screening of Suicide Squad. This guy, a father wildly misjudging how to connect with his teenage daughter. This guy, someone studying the pickup arts at a graduate level. This guy, a Halloween store in March. This guy, Ed Hardy. That's what he looks like. This guy, your uncle trying to actively capture the sex appeal of Hannibal Lecter. This guy, the worst possible image you could associate with the words sugar daddy. This guy, who licks his fingers to turn the pages but way overdoes it. This guy, a vampire for stuff that makes blackheads. This guy, a bad elf. Not an evil elf, just an elf who's bad at it. We see here, yes, Kingdom Hearts' love of complication, but also the way it uses retcons to tell its story. Xemnas, Terra Xehanort, and true old guy Xehanort are all new villains who clearly weren't planned out from the beginning, but they're being introduced as having been the threat all along, recontextualizing previous antagonists as just a precursor to their bigger, badder, big bad. But that's just the way of Kingdom Hearts. For every step the narrative takes, the backstory takes 3. Part of this comes from all the prequels, sidequels, and remakes in the series, but even in mainline entries, the most significant things aren't what happened in the game, but what are revealed to have happened long ago. It may sound like I'm ragging on the series for this, and while I'm not doing that, I understand the appeal. By giving every new threat a clear connection to the story and characters you're already familiar with, they're establishing why they matter, to the story and, by extension, to us, the audience. Brief detour. There's a scene in Mad Men that's super minor for the show's plot, but one that stuck with me because I think it says a lot about how I consume fiction.
John.
In the scene, early in Season 3, we watch protagonist Peggy in a new office bantering with a coworker we've never seen before. And my immediate reaction to this was discomfort, even anger. Like, who is this rando acting like he knows Peggy? Why isn't she bantering with one of the secondary characters we've been following from the first season, like Paul Kinsey or Harry Crane? You know, the terrible ones. I'm immediately hostile towards this character because he's new. More than that, he's new and he's replacing the old. He feels like a threat to the story I've already followed, like he's going to make it meaningless. Intellectually, I know this is more realistic. Life is filled with new randos who become briefly important to you. Emotionally, though, I want the old randos. I want payoff for the characters I've already invested in. I want the past to come back and matter in the present, even knowing that's not how life works. Kingdom Hearts, though, is all too happy to indulge me on this. It's retconning its story all the time, but it's doing so to keep the newer entries connected to the old. It's not, as is so often the case with retcons, an attempt to undo some past narrative mistake, but to make the past matter in the present. To tell a story that, for all its non-Euclidean plot structure, stays cohesive. As bonkers as things get, I don't think there are any real tangents in the storyline, because it is always willing to change its history to accommodate a simple overarching tale of a good boy triumphing over a bad man. And here, I think, is the real appeal of Kingdom Hearts, even for those of us who should know better. It's based off a belief that's obviously false but still seductive. That the future is set, but the past is mutable. And why is that appealing? Because it's the power of nostalgia. Title card. Most days of your life, as you're living them, are a series of consecutive events, but not really a story. A story is a cohesive whole, something with a beginning, middle, and end that at least has the pretense of meaning something. Your life, though, in the present, doesn't feel that way. Most days, at least for me, one thing happens, and then another, and I'm so focused on handling those things without some sort of disaster that I'm not thinking of structure or cohesion. I'm certainly not thinking about what it all means. That stuff comes later, when I have a moment to reflect. Making stories, then, is itself a retcon, a case of the future defining the past. Nostalgia works the same way. It's the process of making memory mean something, certainly more than it ever meant as a moment. Bits of your past suddenly crystallize into emblems for your childhood or adolescence, or for something you can't quite explain but know it catches in your throat. It helps orient us, makes narratives out of events that might otherwise just be continuity. It filters life into something we can make sense of. It's a retcon, a remake, a way you tell your own story. And of course, it hurts. Even as a kid, I was heavy with nostalgia, and I chased the hurt. I tried to experience nostalgia in the present, convinced that if I tried hard enough, paid close enough attention, felt things as deeply as possible, that I could reach the heart of what made those memories so achingly beautiful. I could, I thought, find the core of nostalgia and live in that same soft glow of my memories. What I didn't understand was that if nostalgia happens in post, and it only happens through distortion, then there's no core to find. I never felt the way my memories feel, and I'll never capture that feeling in the present because it doesn't happen in the present. It happens later, when I smooth down the edges, filter the light, and make my memories something new. I didn't know then what I know now, that nostalgia can only be experienced as a loss, a feeling of missing something that I never truly had. Structurally, Kingdom Hearts parallels nostalgia by recontextualizing the past every couple of minutes, but it also parallels nostalgia because it's about losing something beautiful and ephemeral. These games are repeatedly about three childhood friends yearning to leave their impossibly lovely homes and go on grand adventures. And they do. They go on grand adventures. They learn to fly. They become friends with Orlando Bloom. But their homes, lovely, serene, illusory, their childs, picturesque, archetypal, those are gone. That's why the homeworlds have names that hint at endings. The Destiny Islands, Twilight Town. But in Birth by Sleep, the subtext comes roiling to the surface, and it tells you exactly what it means. Home, in Kingdom Hearts, is the land of departure. This is the contrary motion to all the game's most saccharine impulses, their constant refrain of, my friends are my power, their simple and exhausting optimism. Sora keeps winning, fighting figures closer and closer to the true evil at the center of the story, but as he wins, things keep changing. Time keeps passing. Relationships keep changing, and not always for the better. And as much as subsequent games echo the first, the three friends, the leitmotifs, the callbacks and retcons and literal time travel, it never goes back to the starting position. It can't. Not any more than I could go back to what makes my memories hurt so gently. Because the starting position, the core of the memory, the kernel of childhood, the heart of it all, doesn't exist. It's something we make up after it's gone. So no matter how hard we chase it, we never get there. The games do something funny. In just about every one, its villain's goal is to summon something called Kingdom Hearts, which is described as the heart of all worlds, whatever that means. Usually they succeed, and Kingdom Hearts emerges in the form of a heart-shaped moon. But then the next game explains that the Kingdom Hearts you saw in the last one wasn't the real Kingdom Hearts, and to summon the real Kingdom Hearts, the new villain has to do something even worse, and the cycle repeats itself. We keep looking for the heart, and keep being told your heart is in another ribcage. It's the name of the series, and we're always chasing it, never finding it. Because there is no heart, just a string of moons glowing with borrowed light. Title card. So our memories are, at least in some way, fake. They're artificial. But they're ours, right? The Smashing Pumpkins album Melancholy and the Infinite Sadness is a sprawling double CD following an impossibly eventful day in the life of the world's angstiest teen. I bought it when I was in middle school because I was an angsty teen, and I thought that's what angsty teens did. And when I listened to it, for the very first time, I felt nostalgic for it despite having never lived what it was talking about. It was a sort of prefab memory, one that I didn't experience but still felt I owned. And because I was nostalgic for something that hadn't happened yet, I thought, surely, this time, I could experience that nostalgia in real time, before I lost it to the past. It didn't work like that, obviously. No matter how many times I deliberately, almost ritualistically listened to the album during teenage milestones, first day of high school, driver's license, etc., it never made the nostalgia tangible. It couldn't. I mean, nostalgia is something the brain tells itself at night, and besides, this wasn't even my story. It was the story of some much older guy who is now spending his middle age going on InfoWars. The thing is, though, it wasn't his story either. Because this concept of teenagers is only about a century old in America, and the narrative of self-discovery and romance and self-actualization is an even more recent invention, used ultimately as a marketing tool. This platonic ideal I was trying to live out didn't exist. It was a story I got secondhand from Billy Corgan, who got it secondhand himself. It was still a story, though, and if memories are a type of story, maybe the reverse is true. Maybe stories are a type of memory. Maybe they occupy the same place in our brains, and maybe we'll mistake one for the other without realizing it. And why wouldn't we? Both stories and memories are constructs. They have the same soft light to them, the same theatricality, the same intimacy and distance. But most of all, they're both guiding forces, even though they'll never take us to the destination. I know that the image I have of a teenager, an angst-ridden sword adult discovering themselves through romance and rebellion, is a cultural narrative, not my own. I know that even if there's some truth to it, I was told this story long before I was a teenager, and I actively tried to live it out. I know that, to some extent, it's a lie. And yet it's a lie that's still load-bearing to my memories. Thinking back on my adolescence, I'm not sure where my experiences end and someone else's story begins. I trust the basics of my memories, that nothing's been implanted or erased, but the way I think about them and the meaning I make from them is informed by popular narratives, whether I'm aware of it or not. The appeal of this ready-made nostalgia is that it's shared. You can bond with someone over your respective wild youths because your memories both pull from the same sources. The downside, though, is that these sources aren't yours. They're not really true. They're sometimes manipulated by powerful, terrible forces, usually to sell you something awful. The Kingdom Hearts games toy with this pretty explicitly. In Chain of Memories, a character changes Sora's motivation by inserting herself into his memories, and convinces a copy of Riku that he's the real Riku by giving him Riku's memories, but also they're fake. In Recoded, where I'm still not over this, Mickey Mouse nonchalantly clones Sora, the game heavy-handedly asks why we don't care about digital copies as much as the real thing. But there's one case in particular that speaks to the beauty and tragedy of yearning for something that doesn't exist. And it does so in a way that, while probably not good, has at least stuck with me more than maybe anything else in this game. I want to talk about Roxas. Roxas is the player character in the famously long intro to Kingdom Hearts 2. Visually, he's a washed-out Sora, with less absurd hair that's a more muted color, clothes that are still Kingdom Hearts as hell, but mostly monochrome. I've always found Roxas more palatable than Sora. He's less irrepressibly chipper, less happy-go-lucky, likelier to be moody and even angry. And while Sora just keeps triumphing over the darkness, Roxas does little but lose. In Kingdom Hearts 2, Roxas is spending his summer vacation with his friends in Twilight Town, a city of gentle light and warm shadow, its sun perpetually setting. He goes on low-stakes adventures with his 3 best friends, deliberately echoing Sora's childhood from the first game. Sleepy, easygoing music fills the air that sometimes turns to crystalline piano, then goes back to yawning strings. Like the Destiny Islands, this is a memory in real time. And, like the Destiny Islands, it's a pretty memory, written in deep friendships and small rebellions, all cast in the soft, amber light of something ending. Except it's fake. Between scenes with Roxas, we cut to 2 cloaked figures whose backstories I do not have time to explain, and they reveal that the Twilight Town Roxas inhabits is a computer simulation. Roxas is real, but everything else, the streets, the light, the friendship, is a copy of the real Twilight Town. The best friends Roxas spends his time with in the real world don't know who he is. The life he's lived here is an implanted memory. This picture-perfect vision of adolescence is an illusion, and a progress bar just keeps ticking ominously up. Roxas doesn't own the nostalgia he's tied to. The story he's living out is someone else's. In a series with a constant motif of 3 friends, a happy boy, a brooding boy, a girl, he's the 4th. And he doesn't know it yet, but he's doomed. He's Sora's empty body, and Sora wants it back. When that process reaches 100%, Sora's consciousness will take back over, and Roxas will be gone. He'll be used up by someone else's nostalgia. He'll be subsumed by someone else's story. And when Roxas's ego death is complete, no one will even remember him. Defined by false memories, he's even denied the right to be a memory himself. When he learns this, at first, he rages. He smashes up a computer-simulated computer. He despairs. And finally, when he accepts what's about to happen, that he's been betrayed by a beautiful lie, he summons up all the absurd melodrama the series can muster and delivers one of Kingdom Hearts' few iconic lines.
Looks like my summer vacation is over.
Title card. And there we go, the only sad thing to happen to Roxas. Roxas is, intentionally I think, a stand-in for the player. Like he's literally playing a video game within the video game, one that's retreading a lot of the same themes and fixtures of the first Kingdom Hearts. Like the player, he gets to pretend he's the hero because he's the only real person there. Like the player, he finds thrills in what's explicitly fake. And, like the player, the game doesn't know his name. The game matters to Roxas, but to the game, Roxas is quite literally a warm body. The The story needs him, but it doesn't love him any more than a tapeworm loves the belly. And God, what does it say that the computer simulation inside Kingdom Hearts is a trap? That this pretty nostalgia erases somebody from existence? That the player avatar has to suffer ego death before the game can really start? I've long thought the intro to Kingdom Hearts 2 was tragic, but now I see that it's hostile. And in its hostility, it's the most important thing the series has to say. Nostalgia is a powerful motivator and a romantic pain. It is also a lie, a tempting replacement for reality. In the same way it tricks you into chasing something that never existed, it can trick you into chasing something that never should exist, and it will eat you whole if you let it. Nostalgia is kind of inherently a regressive force because it wants to return. It follows, then, that the most regressive political movement in recent American history is an explicit appeal to nostalgia, to make America great again. Even among its adherents, there's no consensus on when that was. The Revolution, the 80s, the Spanish-American War, but there doesn't need to be a consensus, because the past they're trying to recreate has never existed. America has never been both tough and just. It has never existed without racial divides. Even in the 30 years of relative prosperity for the white working class, inequality was rampant and staggering. Every second of American history has included conquest, subjugation, brutality, injustice, genocide atop genocide, but why should any of that matter when the memories feel so good, and the feeling of loss hurts so much? Of course, this nostalgia will not save the people who believe in it. The white working class won't materially benefit from building a wall or forcing hysterectomies or disappearing protesters in unmarked vans. They will not see a better life from tax cuts to the ultra-rich that have never and will never trickle down. They too will be chewed up by an impossibly cruel system. Their only comfort was that it was slightly less cruel to them than to other people. But it works. Nostalgia works. Not to make the world better, of course, and certainly not to recreate the past. No, nostalgia works to motivate, offering the same deal it made to a wayward teenage me. Commit yourself completely to chasing this feeling, and someday you'll catch it. This feeling, better than reality, better story, something you had but lost but can get again if you just want it badly enough. That's the bargain. It's a bad one. You'll never get it, but I understand the appeal. I'm almost sympathetic. Who wouldn't want to live in a beautiful memory? So what if it costs you your soul? I talked earlier about getting irrationally hostile towards a random Mad Men side character because he felt like an intruder to the narrative, cheapening what had come before. Nostalgia works that same way, except that when you apply that logic to people, it's horrific. For the MAGA crowd, trans folk are new to the story, despite having been here all along. So are Antifa, police and prison abolitionists, black people demanding justice from cops, women demanding recourse against the abuses of powerful men. Marginalized people getting even symbolic power feels, to the right, like intrusions, like new characters added in the 5th season, like Cousin Oliver. Except marginalized groups aren't characters, they're human beings. But for nostalgia, applying story logic to real life, that's a distinction without a difference. To be clear, I'm not saying that, Kingdom Hearts got Donald Trump elected. I'm also not saying that Trump voters are simply misunderstood. But as much as I want to draw a line between this large-scale political nostalgia and my own personal kind, I'm not sure I can, especially when I'm nostalgic for some mass media property. We've seen seemingly innocuous nostalgia, like, hey, they're making a new Star Wars movie, turn reactionary real fast. A commitment to revering the old stories becomes vicious towards even cursory and shallow attempts to make a franchise more inclusive. A lot of this is plain old bigotry, yeah, but a lot of plain old bigotry is nostalgia. Title card. I started writing this, at least in part, to explain why I still have a soft spot for Kingdom Hearts. More than that, I started writing this to explain why I still have a soft spot for nostalgia. Even now that I'm older, and the ache doesn't ache quite as bad, and I've come to terms with the illusions of memory, I'll still drift off into an imagined history, yearning for low light and something different in the air, the itch of a song I can't quite remember, boats against the current, borne back ceaselessly into the past, all that. I know that it's impossible, but I even like that part. There's a fitting romance in the way that it's doomed. It doesn't feel great, though, that this same feeling is driving so much evil in the world. Of course, it's more complicated than that. Nostalgia isn't the only reason fascism ascends or naked white supremacy makes inroads, but it's a lot harder to indulge in nostalgia when nostalgia has done so much wrong. I'm not saying that we need to kill it, to purge ourselves of every fond memory. Even if I were saying that, I'm not sure that we could. Nostalgia is just a story, and we can't kill stories. Not completely. But we can question nostalgia. We can doubt it. We can look at the syrupy amber light of an imagined past and see beyond the glare. We can thumb the dog-eared stories of our own lives and recognize we've inherited them. We can look for the heart of something beautiful and never find it, and instead of looking harder, digging deeper, grasping tighter, we can let go. It might be worth noting that Roxas does get a happy ending. Though he starts out as an empty vessel, he develops a personality of his own, with an identity that's distinct from Sora. He's no longer playing out someone else's memory. He's no longer written over by someone else's story. He has something new. He has something his own. Thank you so much for watching. This is my first video, so please let me know what you think. What you liked, what you didn't like, if the editing was bad, if anything was bad, yeah, just let me know. Alright, and then as usual, like, share, subscribe, all the YouTube stuff. It really does help me. And that's it for me. Alright, consistent sign off for the merch.